Today, we are diving into a source text that makes a really bold claim. It argues that after more than a decade of tension, the whole script for how we connect, well, it's getting a total rewrite. A massive cultural shift is happening, and it demands a brand new way of communicating. The source does not pull any punches. It just comes right out and says it, arguing that a long-running trend in how men and women talk to each other has finally hit a wall. It's a huge claim, right? And the text says, don't worry, we've got the numbers to back it up.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the source's take on the social climate, what it calls a war of the sexes. Then we'll get into the numbers that supposedly signal this big change. And finally, we'll unpack 3 really powerful communication strategies that are designed for this new era. So, first things first, we got to get a handle on the problem this text is even talking about. It describes the last 10, maybe 15 years as being defined by this really tense, polarized atmosphere between men and women, especially in Spain. You know, what's so powerful about this slide is that it really nails the exact tone the source is pushing back against. This quote is from a media clip that's cited in the text, and it's used as a perfect example of a confrontational style where men as an entire group are being called out. The source says this wasn't just a one-off thing, this was the norm. Okay, so this is a really key argument in the source material, this idea of collective blame. It claims that for years, the terrible actions of a few bad actors were basically projected onto all men. And to show how absurd this is, the source asks you to just flip it around. Imagine tuning into the news and hearing an anchor blame all women for what a few did. That's the point it's trying to make. So what was the end result of all this? Well, according to the text, it wasn't a better understanding. It was just more division. It created an environment that made building real, genuine connections incredibly hard. Basically turning interactions into a battlefield instead of, a place to connect. But like the source said right at the top, that whole era, it's over. So let's jump into the next part and look at the actual hard data the author uses to make this case that the tide is finally turning. And this isn't just about someone's opinion or what they've noticed. The author really builds their case on cold, hard stats from Spain. And they argue these numbers show a deep, fundamental shift in how people see themselves. A pretty clear rejection of that old climate. All right, here's the first big number. According to the data in the source, today, only 38.4% of the population in Spain actually identifies as feminist. And that number? It gets way more interesting when you see where it was just a little while ago. I mean, check this out. Just 5 years ago, that number was at 50%, half the population. The drop from half to just over a third is what the source calls a total defeat for what it labels official feminism, the mainstream institutional version of the movement. And when you look at the numbers for men, it gets even more dramatic. The source points out that 75% of men, that's 3 out of every 4, do not identify with the feminist label. So the author's take on this is pretty blunt. The movement, as they put it, has lost the men. Okay, so if the whole climate has shifted, then how we communicate has to shift too, right? This is where the source offers 3 new tools. And the first one is all about completely reframing how we interact, moving away from opposition and into collaboration. So what's the big idea here? It's all about getting rid of that confrontational mindset. It's not a debate. It's not a negotiation where somebody wins and somebody loses. It's about creating a shared space. It's about asking, what can we build here together? Yeah, but how do you actually do that? Well, the text says you start by avoiding labels and arguments. So if someone hits you with a big generalization, like all men are, the idea isn't to get into a fight. It's to gently poke a hole in it, to ask a question that makes them think, and to build a bridge based on what makes you a good team, not what makes you enemies. All right, strategy number 2. This one really needs a major shift in how you see things. It's about understanding the core emotion that the text claims is often driving a woman's initial reaction, and that emotion is fear. And this is the question at the heart of it all. So a guy asks a woman to come home with him, and she says no. The source argues that how a man immediately interprets that no is often completely wrong, and figuring out the real reason, well, that's a powerful key to connection. Okay, so this is the absolute game changer in perception, according to the source. A guy's first instinct is to take it personally. She doesn't like me. But the source argues, no, it's not about him. She's reacting out of fear, a fear that's been built up by years and years of social messaging. So the goal isn't to argue, it's to quickly and clearly show that you are safe. And this quote from the text just nails it. It's a classic rule of persuasion. It doesn't matter what you actually intend to do. If she perceives you as a threat, that's her reality, and she is going to act based on that perception. Your job is to manage the perception.
Okay, on to our final tool. And honestly, this one might feel a little backwards at first. It reframes the simple act of showing someone you're interested as a huge display of generosity and even high status. So when the text talks about generosity, what does it actually mean? It's not about money or gifts. It's about being generous with your focus, with your actual interest in the other person. It means you go into an interaction to give, to share a laugh, to offer a real compliment, without thinking, what am I getting back? The source basically says, look, this is just the ticket to the dance. You have to offer that interest first. To try and skip that step, it argues, is like trying to play chess without knowing how the pawns move. You just can't. That's the game. And this chart here, it lays out the difference perfectly. The generous mindset, where you give interest without expecting anything, is framed as a high-status move. It shows you're confident, you're secure. But the opposite, that kind of stingy, what's in it for me attitude, that's framed as low status. It just screams insecurity.
So there you have it. We've walked through the whole argument from this source, from a climate of tension to a turning point shown in the data, and finally through 3 concrete strategies for this new era. The text is making a really clear point. The old language of opposition is dead, and the future of connection is all about a smart understanding of persuasion, empathy, and generosity. And it all leaves us with one big question. Is this the future? Is this really the new language of connection?